Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in. Welcome to First Global's 5th STEM Talk. That's part of the programming for the 2021 First Global Challenge, Discover and Recover. My name is Manisha, and I'm moderating today's talk. As we learn from today to build a better tomorrow with STEM, we're hosting a variety of sessions throughout the season to learn from different STEM enthusiasts about using these fields to discover and recover. Today, we're focusing on the economy. Joining us today is Karan Bhatia, the Vice President of Government Affairs and Public Policy at Google, where he advises Google's leadership on policy issues and works with policymakers, government officials, and key stakeholders in the United States and around the world. Prior to joining Google in 2018, he served as the President of General Electric's Government Affairs and Policy Function, and has served in several senior positions within the US government. In addition to this experience, he was also a partner at Washington, D.C. law firm Wilmer, Cutler, and Pickering, where he worked with international and corporate groups. He also shares his expertise with the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on international trade and investment. So today, we'll be hearing his insights on the economic challenges that have resulted from the pandemic and what we can do to invest in more resilient economies. Thank you for joining us today, Karan.
Hi, Manisha. Thanks for having me.
All right, so let's just get into the questions. Are you ready?
Sounds good. Yeah,
awesome.
Happy to.
Do you want to tell me a little bit about your background and how you got into this field?
Sure. So I was born in the United States, but grew up pretty globally, actually. So spent some time in growing up in Bangladesh and in Kenya, a bit of time in Europe, time in South Asia. So came into it with sort of a very international background. Also came into it with a strong focus on economics. My dad was an economist, and so it was always an area of interest. But for me, the sort of fascinating part was the intersection between economics, sort of from a theoretical standpoint, and also business. Because from my vantage point, and I think the last 20, 30 years have shown this more and more, the role of private sector companies in sort of really driving economic outcomes as opposed to governments, I think is never been greater. So there's really this intersection that exists between how companies operate, government policy, that generate the sort of outcomes around economic development, around people's standards of living, hopefully improving, that I find really interesting. And so that's the sector that I've been sort of working in, particularly in the last 15 years since I was in government. But then prior to that, when I was in the US government doing international economic policy. So it's interesting to see things from both sides of the table, as it were.
That's really cool, because it sounds like your journey has kind of allowed you to shape your experience in a way that you're able to, like you just said, view it from different vantage points and help people out in a lot of different ways. So that's really awesome.
Thank you.
In your current role at Google, what does your day-to-day look like?
So for the last, what has it been, 18 months, my day-to-day has been getting up and walking downstairs to my office, which we are all working from home and have been since last March. Fingers crossed that with the vaccines becoming more prevalent, we start being able to go back to work at some point in person. But at the moment, it's been very much a virtual environment, which, by the way, from a technology perspective and a Google perspective, I think has been, a remarkable sort of step forward for the world as a whole in terms of their familiarity with, their use of tools like this, the ability to connect with people all around the world, but to do so virtually. Not entirely as good, not all the benefits of being able to physically connect, but in some senses easier and more efficient. And in any event, a technological change that I think is going to be with us for many years to come. But just back to your question, what is my day like? Look, it's a combination of internal and external. So from an internal perspective, I have a team of about 350 people doing government affairs and public policy work in more than 50 countries around the world. Google, in fact, all technology companies are very much in the public eye right now. And so we get a lot of questions from governments and want to work with them on how to make technology really work to the benefit of populations and people. So that's on the and internally. So it's managing a team that exists all around the world. A lot of these kinds of calls, everything from organizational meetings to trying to figure out what the new opportunities and challenges around the world are. And then on the external side, it's getting to interact with a lot of important stakeholders, ranging from government officials themselves to groups like yours that are the leaders of the future. So that's sort of a nutshell. It often involves dealing with issues that there's no clear answer to, that we're trying to sort of figure our way through, in many cases, questions that are kind of issues of first impression. And that's what makes the job really interesting and fun.
That's awesome. It sounds like every day might be a little bit different, but you have this common thread of like global communication. You're coming together, you're solving problems. Sounds really exciting, even if it means you're at home right now because of the pandemic.
Yeah, it is. It has been. And I do think that the problems that we're, whether it's Google or frankly any private sector company is now called to address are, they're more challenging, they're more impactful in some sense than they've ever been. So, right now you think of Google as being, well, the search engine, or maybe Google Maps or YouTube even. And those are all important parts of our portfolio and things that we're continuing to grow and innovate and invest in. But there's whole new swaths of technology. How do you make technology accessible for people with disabilities? How do you apply the work that we're doing, for instance, in artificial intelligence to solve the next great healthcare challenge or to deal with climate change? So it is stuff that is, our aperture as a company, I guess maybe is how I should say it, is getting wider and wider, and we're starting to think about all of these new challenges, and that's exciting. It's great to think that we might be able to help the world address some of those issues.
That's amazing. It sounds really rewarding.
Yeah, it has been. I mean, it's every day I wake up here, and on the one hand, I say, oh my gosh, I've got, 5 new letters from members of Congress who are concerned about some particular thing, or government officials around the world, and those are responsibilities we take really seriously and go and have our meetings and try and explain what we're doing. But I also get to spend a little bit of time every day, or I try to every day, at least every week, learning about the next thing that we're working on, learning about some product that I didn't even know that we had going that was, that is potentially really impactful. I'll just give you one example. So we're using our artificial intelligence to help map Africa, but not the parts that are already sort of clearly mapped, but the parts often sort of smaller, like settlements and things around cities where honestly, government officials have no idea how many people might be living in a particular settlement outside of, say, a major capital. And so as a result, when they're doing planning around, what sort of resources, what sort of vaccinations, what's the population look like, they don't really know. Well, through the use of artificial intelligence combined with satellite imagery, we're able to do a really reliable job of trying to map Africa effectively. So that's just an example of the stuff that honestly I didn't know we were doing, but it's incredibly cool and it's impactful. So,
and I'm sure that's something that our students are like totally didn't even know was a thing that was happening in the world. So it just goes to show that there's so many different problems that are out there and so many different innovative solutions. It's just a matter of like, do you have the courage to try and seek out these different things and try and find solutions? So I really like that Google's getting into that. I think it's awesome.
Well, thank you. And look, to your point about the people who might be listening or participating in this exercise and program, I mean, I cannot tell you how um, valuable and how important the kinds of orientation that STEM thinking brings to solving these big challenges. There is this intersection between STEM skills, technology, public policy that I think all combine to help. As we look at the world going forward in the future, that's that sweet spot. That's going to be the people who are actually making huge differences, resolving problems for their communities, for their countries, for the world. And so I'm super excited about this program and the folks that are participating in it. We see you all as potential future Googlers.
Hey, I'm sure our students love to hear that. What would you say has been the most challenging period of your career? And how did your experiences, we've talked about your global upbringing, how did those really shape your career overall?
Well, look, I think any career, I'm my early 50s, so you're going to always have ups and downs, challenging periods there. I'd say, one thing is um, one of the most important factors, I think, ultimately to sort of, I mean, I would say to career success, but maybe it's just sort of generally, is to just be resilient, to sort of know that you're not going to do everything perfectly, but sort of have confidence that, you're going to be able to navigate your way through it. And so I look, I'll give you, I think the last 18 months has been one of the more challenging periods of my life, not necessarily that I mean, happily, fortunately, my family's been healthy and I've been healthy, and we live in a nice uh, part of town in a nice city, so it's not that set of stresses. But when you are dealing with sort of a world that's turned upside down, and you have members, of your team whose family members, I mean, we've had people on our team who've lost family members to COVID, people whose worlds have been turned upside down. I think it's been an incredibly stressful time, and not just obviously for us at Google or on my team, but just in general around the world. The level of stress that I think people have felt is enormous. In terms of how a global upbringing helps address that, I think one thing is you do realize that all regions of the world are not equipped equally to deal with this, and so in the United States, although Delta sort of seems to be putting this, kicking this forward, but by and large, I think people are sort of looking towards, well, we are going to have a reopening here, and we're going to start going back, and that may be a little bit more delayed than anticipated. But I have team members in India, I've got team members in Brazil, I've got folks in sub-Saharan Africa who are sort of looking at the next months and seeing a much more challenging environment. And I think having international familiarity sort of makes you sensitive to the fact that there are very different conditions in different places around the world, and to be sensitive to that, And so I, for instance, I actually think one of the great things about the technology that we're using today is, in some sense, it's an incredible equalizer, right? It used to be that if you were working in some remote office halfway around the world, you felt very distant from the boss. Now, everybody's a box on the screen. You could be sitting right next to the CEO, or you could be half a world away, and you're all kind of, it's a leveling. And I think while there's a lot that we're going to be happy to go back to when things return to some semblance of normal, I also think there's some things like that sort of leveling democratization that the new technology has enabled that we're going to want to try and see how we preserve. So it's just an example.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think our world has both gotten larger and smaller at the same time, in
Yeah.
like the sense that we can explore so many more different things because of our accessibility to the internet. A search
Yeah.
engine like Google, where like I want to know about this thing in this country, let me just Google it. And then also at the same time, like you said, like I'm in Massachusetts and I can talk to whoever I want to in a different country and I just hop online, as opposed to like, oh man, I need to write a letter, I need to hop on a plane, like what do I do to connect with this person? It's definitely a really good point. And I think our students can kind of resonate that a little bit because they're able to collaborate with each other with different ideas, different conversations halfway around the world, which I think is awesome.
You know, Manisha, it's such a good point, and it's so resonant. And you know, one of the things that I'm you know most proud of about Google is, in a sense, we are like the ultimate democratizer, right? Because whether you are the richest billionaire in the world or, you know, a poor, you know, farmer in an underdeveloped country, there are not many products that, regardless of wealth, you get the same product. Okay, so healthcare, no. If you're rich, you get better healthcare than you do if you're poor. Food, no. If you're rich, you get better food than before. But access to information, actually, by virtue of the internet, is an incredible thing, because if you type in a search into Google and somebody else types into a search in Google, regardless of wealth, regardless of whatever, you're going to get the same information. If you pause and think about it, that's an incredible leveler.
Yeah,
that's an
definitely.
incredible, you know, you go in, you want to learn a new language, you go to YouTube. I don't care whether you're rich or poor, you're going to get the same video out of YouTube. And so anyway, we live in an era that's really challenging from a bunch of perspectives. But one of the things that I feel most excited about as I look into the future, and what, you know, future STEM opportunities are going to bring, is that idea that we're less distant than we were before, and that we're less stratified than we were before, or at least we have the opportunity to learn more, to better ourselves, to access information that's going to help. And anyway, I think that's pretty cool.
Speaking of the future, do you want to hear from our first global teams? We've got a bunch
I would
of questions
love to.
for you. Awesome.
Yeah, let's do it.
So our first question comes in from Team Serbia, and they want to know, out of all the positions that you've held in different places you've worked, which position has resonated with you the most, in the sense that you felt like you really learned a lot?
Yeah, I've been really fortunate in my career to have had the opportunity to do a bunch of different roles. I feel like I've learned from all of them. Starting with my very first job, which was working as part of a group of movers. Like, we literally moved furniture around and so forth. And you learn the value of teamwork. You learn like how you rely on your leader, and, you know, the importance of showing up every day and doing a good job. And so really basic stuff, to all the way through. You know, I worked at a law firm where I learned like what it really means to sort of hone your craft and become a good lawyer and make arguments and write better and all of those things. I then went into the U.S. government, and had a series of different roles there, all in sort of the international economic policy space. And maybe if I had to pick a single role that was most impactful for me, it might have been the time that I spent there, and in particular the last role I held, which was at something called the U.S. Trade Representative's Office, where the role really was negotiating international trade agreements for the United States around the world, and sort of saw the power of international commerce and trade to change lives, you know, to help whether it's people in the United States be able to export products around the world, and as a result grow jobs and investment here in the US, or people around the world getting the benefit of products they wouldn't otherwise have at lower prices. And so I think that's been was a tremendous experience. And then subsequently getting the chance to work at a couple of big companies, GE and now Google, has been a learning experience itself on, you know, how international business works from that perspective. So I've been blessed, lots of different learning experiences.
Speaking to your current experience at Google, Team Estonia would like to know, in what ways has the pandemic changed Google, and how did you adapt to the challenges that a pandemic really presents?
Yeah, it's a great question, and you know, to the point that we've sort of touched on this a little bit before. You know, Google did change. I think every company, every organization's been impacted by the pandemic in terms of how they operate. I mean, like everybody else, we basically went remote. We have 150,000 plus employees around the world. Most of them are not going into offices still today. And we've relied much more on virtual gatherings and technology like this. We've learned how to be productive and how to be efficient. We've improved, and one thing that it's done in a very sort of tangible way is it's forced us to innovate new products for the pandemic era. And I'll mention two really quickly. One is a report that we're able to generate and share with governments around the world that aggregate people's data about people's movement. So it's done all anonymously, all in a privacy protective way. But based on people's cell phones, we're able to sort of figure out when a announcement comes out from a government around staying at home, how impactful is that? How much are people subsequently after that actually going someplace? And if they're going someplace, where are they going? Are they going to stores? Are they going to, parks? What are they doing? And for policymakers, that's super helpful, interesting information to understand how they make their edicts effective. So that was one tool. Another that we created that I think was interesting is an API that we've been working on with Apple, which in itself is a pretty big thing because Google and Apple are pretty strong competitors. But when we saw the challenges ahead, we decided to come together with them to enable governments to put in contact tracing apps onto the web, and download for people to download on their phones, so that people who contract the pandemic, again, in a privacy protective way, can get informed that they've been, or the people who they've come into contact with know to go and get tested. So just a couple of examples of some of the innovation. So those are a couple of examples of things that we've been doing as a result of the pandemic.
So earlier, we touched a little bit on how the internet and accessibility to information has created a sense of equity in the world that we haven't really seen before. Team Gambia would like to know what can be done to now ensure that, as the world tries to rebuild, how can we ensure that the unequal distribution of wealth doesn't increase further for future generations?
Look, I think this is a huge issue and challenge because we are seeing it everywhere. We're seeing it in the numbers. For those of you who are economists, Gini coefficients are sort of how you measure this, and we're seeing concerns, there, and we're seeing it in the politics of a lot of countries, where we're seeing more populism and more concerns about how to distribute wealth, how to make things equal. I don't have all the solutions for this. I mean, people look at issues like tax policy, and I know there's a lot going on globally as well as in a lot of individual companies to think about how do you reform international tax policy. It's something that we're quite interested in and have been supportive of. But I will go back to sort of what I said before. I do think technology has a lot to do with it. I think it's an incredible enabler, whether it's the technology that would allow people to access the internet and improve their own lots in life, or whether it's technological solutions to issues like climate change. I truly do think that is going to be one of the biggest challenges that the world confronts, and that technology is charged with addressing through new products, and we've already seen that happen. Innovation has made energy much cleaner at a much lower price point than it is before, which is a terrific development. But challenges like climate change are not equally impactful. They impact poorer countries often more, and poorer populations often more. And so, in any event, I think having technology be part of the solution there is being deployed as one part of the solution to the challenge that Team Gambia identified.
Next up, it's Team Japan, and they would like to know, what can the youth of the world do to invest in a more resilient economy?
So look, I think a lot of this goes back to innovation. I don't mean to sound like a broken record here, but the work that you all are doing, I know in this gathering, But just more generally, the solution I truly do believe to resiliency, whether you want to talk about sustainability from a climate perspective, or whether you want to talk about it being resilient from an economic standpoint, I think is going to come down to innovation. I think the solutions that need to the solutions to these big challenges, it's very rare that you will find politically palatable solutions that involve people giving things up, right? So yeah, you know what? I know it's more environmentally sound for me not to drive, so I'm going to give up my car. Yeah, like not so many people are going to do that. Everybody wants to be able to get where they need to go, and cars. So I do think that it is that next generation. Okay, the demand is there, the need is there. How do we do it in a way that is more resilient, that is more sustainable? And so I think that from my vantage point, I think it does come down to innovation. What I would say, particularly for this team, is don't assume that innovating solutions is necessarily a one-size-fits-all. There are very localized solutions that work differently in different places around the world. When I was at GE, we had a healthcare business, and we as a company were the world's leader in making really expensive MRI equipment. Made great, like the most slices MRI equipment, very, very precise. But these machines cost $1 million or $2 million, and you think about the challenges of the poor countries around the world. Well, we had a team in India that said, we can't afford that machine, but what we can afford is an iPhone or an iPad or some sort of a portable device that if you can connect a transducer to, you can actually do sonograms for women in remote villages. And it doesn't have to be a doctor. It can be, a midwife, a nurse, or whatever that can actually take a sonogram of a pregnant woman's belly and sort of show whether the baby's in breech position. The solution costs less than $100, and yet you are able to get a lot of the benefits. That took localized innovation, right? That wasn't like, let's build the next big thing for the next biggest hospital in the US or Western Europe. It's how do you innovate locally? And I think that perspective needs to continue to be brought to innovation challenges around the world.
It's a really, really good perspective and really strong example. I think that's incredible. Being someone who works in healthcare myself, like that is, I think I'm just mind blown. I think that's the coolest thing ever. I really like it. Yeah. Team Guatemala. So I think I think this kind of helps their question a little bit, but they want to know like what STEM tools currently exist that can help the world economy recover stronger after the pandemic. Do you have any like localized examples in different regions you can think of?
Well, look, I'll give you a different example that maybe gets to this a little bit. One of you were alluding before to the ability to get on the internet and connect, and I agree with that. But I will tell you the biggest challenge that we face in a lot of parts of the world is people can't get on the internet. Like there's not sufficient connectivity. There's not sufficient broadband connectivity to do that. Places like sub-Saharan Africa, this is a huge challenge. One of the innovations that we've come up with, this is an example, and again, it's a localized kind of thing, where rather than necessarily try and go at the problem by increasing the amount of broadband connectivity, although that is an important feature of it, we've changed the apps. So what we've done is we said, okay, we can create a version of Google search that uses, I think it's like a third of the amount of bandwidth, the amount of data bytes per second as a typical Google solution would, and the quality of the product is almost as good, right? It's not quite as good, but it's pretty good. So that's sort of an innovative solution that's like, okay, we've got this constraint, would like to address the constraint, but in the interim, how do we come up with a different product that can give people a lot of the benefit of what they're looking at before? So I guess I think that sort of in terms of helping the economy to come back stronger, we need STEM tools and we need sort of a STEM mindset and an innovation mindset that's looking at all pieces of the equation. Everything from how do you create the next great breakthrough, whether it's in energy technology or healthcare or what have you, to how do we create things that actually can enable us to do our jobs as well within the existing constraints. And so that's sort of one thing that I would suggest people think about.
It sounds like the greatest tool that our students can utilize is their brains in this
There
point.
you go.
So I like that.
That's spot on.
This next question comes from Team Qatar. They would like to know, are there opportunities for countries to build back greener, more sustainable economies?
Yeah, look, I think this is one of the great opportunities that now exist for economies generally. And I do think the pandemic opens up sort of new, I mean, we're at a point where we're recreating a lot of things, right? We're trying to figure out what's the right way to work, what's the right way to live, to travel, all of those things. And I think in the context of a lot of countries and cities and communities trying to figure out what is the new normal, I think if we can put a lens, a sustainability and a climate lens on some of those challenges, I think we potentially will kill two birds with one stone, right? I mean, we'll be both helping the economy come back stronger and grow, but we'll be doing it in a way that is cleaner and more sustainable. So I'm certainly a believer in this. And look, I think this is going to be the responsibility of a lot of different players. I think governments have a responsibility here, whether it's national governments and the way they prioritize their spending and their plans. I think cities and states and localities have an opportunity to do more here by, incentivizing greener technologies. And then I think companies in the private sector have a responsibility here as well to invest in those kinds of technologies. And there's a big movement, as you may know, what's called ESG, environmental sustainability and governance, which is basically companies being held more accountable than ever before for what their footprint looks like, and what they're actually doing to try and address the issue. And I think, again, not to come back to Google on everything, but so we are one of the biggest users of electricity in the world because we run these huge data farms. So data centers all over the world is remarkably big, but they also are, use a lot of electricity. So we early on made what was seen as being this incredible, ambitious commitment to be net carbon neutral. We did that back in 2007, I believe. We subsequently, most recently, doubled down and say, not only are we going to be net neutral, in other words, we're going to offset things, we actually are going to run all of our facilities carbon free by 2030. And so that is like a huge step forward. First company to do it. I'm really proud of that. But you marry that, so something, that's an example of what you're doing yourself. But you've got to be doing it not just on your own footprint, but you've got to be thinking about how do you do it in your products as well. So just to give you a small example, we do a lot of things with enabling the production of cleaner energy. But here's something that might resonate. If you go on to Google Flights right now and look for a flight, it used to be that it would rank them based on price, maybe based on how short the duration was. You now can look at them based on carbon footprint as well, which I think is an interesting additional factor for consumers to bear in mind, to sort of think about. So that was something that we decided we could contribute to the cause.
It sounds like Google's really leading by example, which I think speaks volumes to, like, you're going to say you're going to do these things, but until you actually do them, that carries that extra weight of like, this is possible.
And it is a passion, I think, Manisha, for the people in the company, which I guess comes to a point about like what you all are thinking about. I mean, as you go into your fields of choice, as you start building out careers, remembering what it is you care about and looking for places that are going to allow you to work on those things, allow you to innovate around those challenges, I think is really important. That's something that we've always wanted people who are dedicated, to what they're doing, building the next great search engine or whatever, but also come with values that sort of infuse the kind of things they're working on. So
that's really powerful advice. I think especially like a lot of our students are starting to look at future opportunities. What does after their graduation from First Global really look like? And I think that's something that they should really take into account. And it's something that like I'm definitely taking into account with daily choices, whether it's like using a metal straw, like even something as simple like that makes waves, which is, I think, a really powerful piece of advice to give our students. So I like it. I like to hear it.
Good.
Next question, Team Albania. And they got another, all these questions have been like really strong questions. This one speaks to the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I know our students, despite they're not like as involved in government or in private sector the way that you are, everyone can kind of tell that there's going to be some long lasting impacts, whether good, maybe some negative. But what would you think is the most urgent problem facing the global economy right now?
Well, look, I think it would be crazy to say anything other than the pandemic itself, recovering from COVID. I think it's creating so many different challenges. Obviously, it's creating healthcare challenges immediately in a lot of places around the world. I think it is creating, and this alludes to some of the questions before, I think it's creating issues of income inequality and disparity that I think are creating political tensions and pressures, which are challenging. I think that it is in a sense sort of weakening globalization, right? So the familiarity that we all used to have with like, well, I would travel here or I would travel there, or yes, this country is, I know people of it. Like it's harder, even within 2 years. People are traveling less. People are less immediately familiar, and I don't know. Different people in the program may have different experiences, but for me, I always felt like anytime I had a chance to travel someplace, I came back sort of feeling more passionate about the place and feeling connected to the place in a way that, when you're dealing with it from a distance, you're like, I don't really have a feeling for the place. And as a result, you tend to become more narrowly focused. I think you become more, in a sense, nationalistic. And so I actually think one of the biggest challenges we're going to face if this continues for a long time is how do we continue to operate around global problems as a global collective, which is why I love this program, because it's bringing you all together in a way that, otherwise you wouldn't be. So I think that is one of the big challenges, honestly.
Very true. And I think it's something that, like, as you've just said, it hits all of us very deeply as part of this program.
Yeah.
Our final question, I'm really sad that we're almost wrapped up here. It comes from Team St. Kitts and Nevis. They would like to know, how can policy guide research and development in technology across the world? And then what advice can you give our students who are interested in policy and getting involved?
Yeah, look, I love this question because I, as I said to begin with, I think this intersection between policy, science, technology, business, I just see this as being so consequential for how the world continues to develop. I think if you look back at the last, not just couple of years, but 20, 30 years, the things that have dramatically changed people's lives, right? So the IT revolution, the internet, perhaps some healthcare developments, and the things that we're likely to see going forward in terms of energy, medical, communications, travel, those are going to develop driven by STEM-enabled research and innovation. But the ways those play out and their impact is going to be enormously impacted by good public policy. And so I think that, and I see this every day at Google, we have brilliant scientists, brilliant people, but to the extent they're not familiar with sort of the broader policy and political environment out there, they're missing something, I think. And so I guess what I would say is, for folks who are interested in public policy, don't lose your focus on STEM. I love the fact that you've got capabilities and interest in that space, and I do think it is going to be impactful, and it gives you a special standing in these discussions, right? It's one thing for somebody to talk about these issues who's really not got any familiarity and background, but when you do, you've got special credibility. So don't lose that, and in fact, lean into it. Pick an area. I mean, I've often said, the luxury of being able to be an expert in everything is, reserved for folks who are in their 60s, 70s, or whatever, and have had a whole lot of experiences. Start by being really focused and really good in one area, right? Whatever it may be, nuclear energy or clean water, but choose that space, really master it, and then build out from there, I think. Because I think that the solutions that we need to these problems today are really complicated. It's the days of sort of facile solutions. I just don't. We're not in that world. We need. These are hard problems. They require complex solutions, and that requires sort of detailed understanding. So, I'd say go deep, and hang on to your STEM credentials. They'll always be valuable.
And with that awesome advice, we actually conclude today's STEM Talk. Thank you so much, Karan, for taking the time to talk with us. I really enjoyed learning about your background and how the world is really just transforming, your perspective on, and sharing with us how you and Google are really kind of changing the game. It's incredibly inspiring and motivating that, despite all the challenges that we're facing today, there is good out there, and there's good that's coming from the future generation as well. Do you have any final words or advice you'd like to share with those watching at home?
Well, thanks, Manisha. First of all, it's honestly an honor to be able to do this. I think this is an incredible program. The fact that the questions have spanned such interesting topics, but that they've come from such a diverse array of countries around the world, speaks to what a great program this is, and how proud you all should be to be part of it, and how inspiring it is. I will tell you that when you get into deeper into your careers, and you're working on whatever the tough issue du jour may be, you sometimes sort of lose track of, like, oh God, why am I doing this? It's this is going to take forever, and who knows whether we're going to get there. And that may be whether you're working on a scientific breakthrough, or whether you're working on a public policy issue, or a business challenge, or whatever else. But when you get exposed to folks at the early end of their career who are working on in these spaces, and are looking at the future, and are excited about creating a better world, and that's what I see so much in young people today, particularly those that are globally connected like you all, it gives me inspiration. It makes me want to, like, accomplish something and succeed, and leave a better environment for the next generation. So share that enthusiasm, because people can use the shot of energy right now, I'd say. So thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to come and speak with everybody.
Well said. Thank you all for joining us at home, and we look forward to having you at our next talk.